On my first night in my new 4-bedroom beach house, my son called "Move out of the master bedroom. My wife wants it." My daughter-in-law added, "You live alone. Keeping 4 bedrooms to yourself is selfish." He said a moving truck would arrive at 10 to put my belongings in the garage. I calmly replied, 10 is perfect. At 9:55, the truck pulled into my driveway. I turned to the woman holding a folder. "They're here. Let's begin. So glad you're here on Dad's Revenge Stories. Tell me below, which city or country are you watching from today?" A quick note. Certain elements are fictionalized for narrative impact and life lessons. Resemblances to actual names or places are accidental, but the core takeaway is deeply meaningful. The paint smell had not left yet. I stood at the kitchen window of the house I had just moved into, listening to the Atlantic push itself against the shore, somewhere beyond the second row of houses. And I thought about how long it takes a place to stop smelling like possibility and start smelling like home. The ocean came through the screen in slow, steady pulls, like the whole coastline was breathing. I had left the window open on purpose. After 40 years of a Raleigh apartment that smelled like motor oil and old carpet, I figured I had earned the right to let the salt air in. I had set a kettle on the stove. Not because I wanted tea, but because I needed something to do with my hands. A man who has worked with them his whole life does not know what to do with stillness. The kitchen was small and clean, and mine the counters were bare, except for a box of Earl Grey and the 2 mugs I had unpacked first, before anything else, because my late mother always said that a kitchen without 2 mugs ready is a kitchen that has given up on company. I was reaching for the kettle when the phone rang. I looked at the screen. Daniel. My chest did not tighten the way it might have once. I had gotten past the age where my son's name on a phone screen filled me with warmth. That had happened slowly, the way erosion happens. You do not notice the ground shifting until one day you reach for something that used to be there and find empty air instead. I answered, "Dad." His voice had that particular flatness he used when he had already decided how a conversation was going to end. "We need to talk about the house." "I just moved in this evening," I said. "The boxes are still in the hallway." "I know. That's kind of the thing." He cleared his throat. "Claire and I have been talking, and honestly, Dad, 4 bedrooms for one person, that master suite is completely wasted on you." My grip tightened on the phone, but I kept my voice even. "It's my house, Daniel. So of course it is. Nobody's saying it isn't." He had a way of agreeing with you while meaning the opposite, like he was patting your head. "But you're 68 years old and you live alone." Claire pointed out, and she's right, that it just doesn't make practical sense. "We're going to send a truck over tomorrow morning. 10 o'clock. The guys will move your things down to the garage and set up the master bedroom for when she and I come down on weekends. You'll still have the other rooms." The kettle began to tremble on the burner, a low whistle building in its throat. 10 o'clock, I repeated. Then Claire's voice came on. She must have been sitting right there, the 2 of them on the couch, the phone between them like a shared weapon. "It's not personal, Robert. It's just logical. A man your age rattling around in all that space, it's a little sad, honestly. We'd be using the room. You'd barely notice the difference." My jaw tightened so hard, I felt it behind my ears. A man your age. I had heard that phrase used to justify 100 small thefts over the years. A man your age shouldn't drive at night. A man your age doesn't need a savings account that large. A man your age ought to be thinking about what happens after. What happens after had always been Daniel's favorite subject. I turned toward the hallway. It was dark at that end of the house, but I knew what was there. 2 closed doors side by side at the far end of the corridor. I had painted those rooms myself, every wall, every corner, on my hands and knees, along the baseboard. My back had ached for a week after. I had not minded a single minute of it. 10 o'clock works perfectly for me, Daniel, I said. I'll be here. A pause. He had expected resistance. He had prepared for resistance, had his arguments lined up and ready. My agreement knocked them all sideways. Good, he said, recovering. Good. We'll see you in the morning, then. You will, I said. Good night. I set the phone face down on the counter. The kettle was screaming now. I lifted it off the burner and poured the water and watched the steam rise toward the ceiling and thought about the 2 mugs I had unpacked first. Company, my mother used to say. A kitchen should always be ready for company. Tomorrow it would be. I carried my tea down the hall and stood at the end of it in front of those 2 closed doors. I put my hand flat against the wood of the left one, cool under my palm, steady. Not yet, I said to no one. But soon. Then I went back to the kitchen, set the mug on the counter, and looked at the calendar on my phone. There it was, where it had been sitting for 3 weeks. Tuesday, 10 o'clock, 1 line, home visit D. Prescott. I smiled for the first time all evening. It was not a large smile, but it was the realest thing in the room. I turned off the kitchen light and listened to the ocean breathe. The tea went cold while I sat at the kitchen table thinking about how I got here. Not to this house, I mean to this version of myself, the man who had just told his son that 10 o'clock worked perfectly and meant something entirely different than what his son had heard. That man had taken a long time to become. 40 years, give or take. I started at Harper's Building Supply in Raleigh in 1983. I was 26 years old, newly divorced from my first wife, Hannah's mother, Margaret, a quiet woman who deserved better than a man who worked 60 hours a week and came home too tired to be a husband. I took the job because they needed someone who could lift and didn't ask many questions, and those were my 2 best qualities at the time. I stayed for 4 decades. There is a particular kind of dignity in work that people do not talk about anymore. Not because it doesn't exist, but because it doesn't photograph well. I loaded flatbeds at 5 in the morning when January turned the loading dock into a wind tunnel. I drove delivery trucks across 3 counties in summer heat that made the asphalt shimmer like a mirage. I learned the weight of every grade of lumber, every thickness of drywall, every size of copper pipe, by the feel of it in my hands. By the time I retired, I could price a renovation quote in my head faster than most men half my age could find the calculator app on their phone. I did not get rich, but I got free. That was the goal, though I could not have named it that way when I was 30. The savings account started as a habit and became a principle. I ate lunch at my desk 5 days a week. I drove the same Ford pickup for 17 years because it ran fine, and I did not care what my neighbors thought of my driveway. I never bought a boat, never took a cruise, never let Daniel talk me into any of the investment opportunities he kept bringing up at Thanksgiving, the ones that were always going to double in value by spring. By the time I retired at 65, I had $230,000 in a savings account that had never been touched. Daniel thought it was for him. He had thought so for years. I could see it in the way he looked at me sometimes, calculating, measuring the way a man looks at a piece of land he has already decided is going to be his eventually. He was patient about it, the way a person is patient when they believe time is on their side. He was wrong about what time was doing. I am getting ahead of myself. But there is a moment I need to tell you about because it explains why this house matters the way it does. I remember the morning I called Sandra, the realtor, for the first time. It was a Tuesday in May, 2 months after I found the box in the garage, 6 weeks after I first spoke with Buncombe County, and understood that 2 children were waiting for someone to come forward. I was standing at the kitchen window of my apartment with a cup of coffee that had gone cold an hour ago, and I opened the browser on my phone and typed 4-bedroom houses near Beach, North Carolina, and felt something in my chest shift, not break shift, the way a door does when you finally push it the right direction. Sandra was a cheerful woman who asked good questions and had learned not to assume she understood why a person wanted what they wanted. When I told her I needed 4 bedrooms, she did not flinch. When I asked her about the quality of the school districts and the nearest pediatric urgent care clinic, she typed the answers into her notepad without remarking that I was a 68-year-old man with no children in sight. I liked her for that. I looked at 6 houses in 3 weeks. The 5th one was fine. The 6th one was the one. It was not the biggest house on the block or the newest. The kitchen was smaller than I would have liked, and the back porch needed work. But it had 2 bedrooms at the end of the hall that caught the morning light in a way that made you want to put something good in them. And from the small window at the top of the stairs, if you leaned just slightly to the left, you could see the lighthouse out on the point, a white shape against the gray-blue horizon, blinking its patient rhythm against the dark. I stood at that window for a long time. Then I went downstairs and found Sandra in the kitchen writing measurements in her notepad. "I'll take it," I told her. She looked up. "Do you want to sleep on it? It's a significant purchase." "I've been sleeping on it for 40 years, I said. "I'm done sleeping." She laughed, which was the right response, and we shook hands right there on the linoleum floor. That was June. By the end of July, I had keys. By the end of August, I had moved in, painted 2 rooms at the end of the hall, in colors I had chosen carefully, and answered a phone call from my son that he thought ended with my surrender. He had no idea that the most important appointment of my life was already written in my calendar for the same morning he had just claimed for himself. He had no idea who would be sitting in my kitchen when his truck turned onto my street, and that was exactly the way I needed it. It was a Tuesday in March, and Daniel's garage smelled the way all garages smell when a man has too many things and not enough reason to let any of them go: motor oil, damp cardboard, the particular staleness of air that hasn't moved since last autumn. Daniel had called me the week before, voice easy and casual the way it gets when he wants something that sounds like a favor but isn't. "Dad, I need the garage cleared out before the weekend. Claire wants to put in a shelving unit, and I just don't have the time. You're retired. You've got the truck. Would you mind?" I did not mind. I had spent 40 years moving things for a living. An afternoon in my son's garage was nothing. Daniel left before I started. Said he had a meeting, kissed Claire on the cheek in the doorway, backed the SUV out with that particular confidence of a man who has never once had to wonder whether the ground under his feet was solid. I watched him go, and then I pulled on my work gloves and got started. The garage was organized the way Daniel organized everything, in layers. The useful things in front, the inconvenient things behind the things he didn't want to look at, pressed all the way to the back wall behind whatever was heaviest. I worked my way through it methodically, the way I'd learned to approach any job, stack by stack, box by box. I had been at it for about 2 hours when I moved the old steel toolbox in the back left corner. It was mine originally. I'd given it to Daniel when he bought his first house, told him every man needed a decent set of tools. He had clearly used it as a doorstop since then, because behind it, pressed flush against the baseboard, was a cardboard box sealed with brown packing tape that had gone yellow at the edges. I almost left it, almost pushed it to the side with the other boxes destined for the donation pile. Then I saw the handwriting on the side panel. 3 letters written in blue marker in a script I hadn't seen in 15 years, but recognized in the same instant a man recognizes his own heartbeat. HR. My gloves came off so fast I dropped one on the concrete floor and didn't stop to pick it up. Hannah Reed. My daughter. My hands were shaking not a little. but the full, uncontrollable trembling of a man whose body has understood something before his mind has caught up. I pulled the tape back. The box was packed tight: envelopes, postcards, small folded notes, every single one addressed the same way. Robert Hayes, 412 Dunmore Avenue, Raleigh, NC, my address, my name. In Hannah's handwriting, which I would know anywhere in any light at any age because it looked exactly like her mother's. And I had loved her mother once with everything I had. I counted 48 pieces of mail. 48. I sat down on the concrete floor of my son's garage because my legs simply stopped holding me. The radio from the house next door was playing something with a steel guitar, cheerful and oblivious, and outside a car drove past, and the world just kept going like nothing had happened. I picked up the letter on top. The postmark said March 2023. I opened it with hands that would not steady themselves and read, "Daddy, I brought the kids to your birthday last year. We waited outside for 2 hours in the rain. Owen kept asking me why Grandpa doesn't come out. I told him you were probably tired. I don't know if that was the right thing to say. I still love you. Please write back. I keep thinking you must have gotten busy, or maybe our letters aren't reaching you. I'm going to try this address one more time. Love, Hannah." The pain that moved through my chest in that moment was not the sharp kind. It was the slow kind. The kind that spreads. The kind that makes you understand that something has been wrong for a very long time, and you have been the last one to know it. She waited outside. I said out loud to no one. My voice came out broken at the edges in a way I had not heard from myself since the day Margaret told me she was leaving. She brought those babies in the rain, and she waited 2 hours, and I was not home. I read 5 more letters right there on the garage floor. My back ached against the concrete, and my knee throbbed where I'd been kneeling, and I did not move. Hannah wrote about her job as a home health aide in Asheville. She wrote about Lily starting kindergarten, losing her first tooth, asking questions that were too big for a 5-year-old. She wrote about Owen being born small and coming home late from the hospital, and how she had sat beside his bassinet for 3 nights straight, just listening to him breathe. She wrote about missing me in the specific aching way that daughters miss fathers. They have not stopped loving, even when loving them has become a complicated thing. "I know things got hard between us after you and Mom," she wrote in one letter, "but I've never once stopped thinking of you as my dad. I just need you to know that." I pressed that letter against my sternum with both hands and stared at the water stain on the garage ceiling and let myself feel the full weight of what was in that box. Daniel had known about every single one. I did not say it out loud. I did not need to. A man who has worked alongside other men for 4 decades learns to read a situation without narrating it. The box was behind his toolbox. The tape had been opened and resealed. I could see the edges where it had been lifted. He had read them. He had kept them. And for 8 years he had looked at my face across the dinner table at Thanksgiving and Christmas and said, "She made her choice. Dad and I had believed him because he was my son. And I had not understood yet what my son was capable of." I stood up. My knees ached and my eyes burned hot in the way they do just before a man my age will absolutely not cry in someone else's garage. I loaded the box into the back of my truck with the kind of careful deliberateness you use when you are carrying something that matters. I closed the tailgate. I pulled off my other glove. Then I took out my phone and sent Daniel a text. Got the garage sorted. Heading home. Thanks for letting me help. 3 dots appeared. Then, thanks, Dad. You're the best. I drove home with both hands on the wheel and the box on the passenger seat, and the steel guitar still playing somewhere behind me, getting smaller and smaller until it was gone. I spread them across the kitchen table in my apartment that night. All 48 of them sorted by postmark, oldest to newest, The way you lay out evidence when you need to see the full shape of a thing before you can understand what it means. The oldest letter was dated September 2016. Hannah would have been 31. I would have been 61. I had been working the Tuesday morning shift at Harper's the week that letter was mailed, and I had no memory of it arriving because it never did. I poured myself 2 fingers of bourbon, the good kind, the bottle I kept in the cabinet above the refrigerator for occasions that required something stronger than coffee, and I sat down and I read every single one. It took 3 hours. By the time I finished, the bourbon was gone, the table was covered in paper, and I understood something about the last 15 years of my life that rearranged everything I thought I knew about it. The story Daniel had built was not a casual lie. It was a construction. Careful, load-bearing, built to last. I heard his voice in my head, the way you hear a recording, clear, consistent, utterly convincing. She left Dad. Right after you and her mom split. She decided she didn't want anything to do with the family anymore. I had asked about Hannah in those early years before I stopped asking, because the answers were always the same. Each time Daniel had a version ready. She called me once a few years back. She sounded fine. She's got her own life. I tried to reach her last Christmas. The numbers disconnected. You know how she was, Dad. Proud. She made her choice. She made her choice. I had heard that sentence so many times I had eventually stopped hearing it as a sentence and started hearing it as a fact. The kind of fact you stop questioning because it has been repeated so often it has calcified into something that feels like memory. I pressed my fists against my eyes until I saw white. The anger that moved through me was not the hot, explosive kind. It was the cold, clarifying kind. The kind that does not make a man want to break things. It makes him want to understand exactly what happened and exactly what to do about it. 9 years, I said to the empty kitchen. 9 years, Daniel. Hannah had written her first letter to me in September of 2016. She had written her last one. I knew now it was her last, though she had not known it when she wrote it in November of 2024. 9 years of trying. 9 years of letters and postcards and birthday cards I had never once received, folded up behind a steel toolbox in a garage in North Raleigh. I picked up the letter she'd written in the spring of 2019. Lily's handwriting was inside in the careful block letters of a 5-year-old who has been told to write something special. Dear Grandpa, I drew you a picture. Mama says you are tall. I made you tall. Love, Lily. There was a drawing on the back, a large figure with a circle for a head and lines for legs standing beside a smaller figure with curly hair. Tall Grandpa and little Lily labeled in Hannah's handwriting. My throat closed so hard it hurt. Lily had drawn me a picture at age 5. She had never met me. She had drawn me tall because her mama said I was tall. And her mama had mailed it to my address, first class, and Daniel had opened it, read it, and buried it in a box behind a toolbox, so I would never know. I stood up from the table because I could not sit anymore. My chest felt like something inside it was pulling in 2 directions at once, and the only thing that helped was moving. I walked to the window. Outside, the streetlights of Dunmore Avenue glowed orange against the early March dark, and a neighbor's dog was barking at something in the bushes, and a teenager was riding a bicycle with no hands, and all of it was so ordinary and so unchanged that it made the thing inside me pull even harder. I walked back to the table. I had believed Daniel because I had no reason not to. That was the part that was hardest to sit with. I had not been naive. I had not been foolish. I had trusted my son the way a father trusts a son completely without inventory, the way you trust the floor under your feet to hold you up, and the only way to know it will not is to fall through it. I was 68 years old, and I was falling through the floor of the last 15 years of my life. She did not leave, I said, and my voice cracked straight down the middle. She did not choose to disappear. She wrote to me every year. She brought my grandchildren to my door in the rain on my birthday, and she stood outside for 2 hours because she still believed I might come out. I pressed both hands flat on the table and leaned my weight into them and breathed until the burning behind my eyes settled into something I could hold. Then I looked at the return address on every envelope. Hannah Reed, 412 Maple Drive, Asheville, NC, same address all 9 years. She had not moved. She had not hidden. She had been 230 miles away this whole time, in a house with a number I could have dialed any Tuesday afternoon if anyone had ever thought to give it to me. I found a notepad in the kitchen drawer and wrote the number down, carefully, like it might disappear. Then I looked at the bottom of the box, at the last thing in it, something that was not Hannah's handwriting at all. A piece of paper folded in quarters, the kind torn from a legal pad. I unfolded it. My stomach dropped straight to the floor. I recognized the handwriting before I read a single word. Bold, slanted the capital letters, slightly too large, the handwriting of a man who had learned it was easier to dominate a page than to share it. Daniel's handwriting. And I understood in the space between one heartbeat and the next that what I was holding was not just a hidden box of letters. It was something worse. Something that did not end with keeping the truth from me, but had actively reached out to push her away. 3 days after I found the box, I sat down at the kitchen table with the notepad where I had written Hannah's address and a phone number I had found inside one of her later letters, a cell number she had included with a note that said, "In case the mail isn't getting through Daddy, please just call." She had written that in 2022, 3 years ago, and I was calling now. My hand was steady when I dialed. The rest of me was not. It rang 4 times. I was preparing myself for voicemail, rehearsing what I would say when a woman picked up. Her voice was warm and a little cautious, the way voices get when an unfamiliar number calls. "Hello. Hello," I said. "My name is Robert Hayes. I'm trying to reach my daughter Hannah Reed. I believe this was her number or someone who knew her. I'm sorry to call without warning, I've only just found it." A pause. Not long, but the kind of pause that carries weight. "Mr. Hayes." Her voice changed, softened in a way that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up straight. "My name is Margaret Calloway. I lived next door to Hannah on Maple Drive. I've had her phone for a few months. I kept it because I didn't know who else might call, and I didn't want anyone to just not get an answer." My throat tightened so hard I had to swallow twice before I could speak. "Why do you have her phone, Ms. Calloway?" Another pause. Longer this time. "Mr. Hayes, I'm so sorry." Her voice cracked at the edges, and hearing someone else's voice crack on my behalf nearly undid me completely. "Hannah passed away in December. There was an accident on Interstate 26 in the rain on a Friday night. The roads were bad that week, the whole stretch between Asheville and Hendersonville. It was quick from what the paramedics told us afterward. She didn't suffer. I want you to know that." The kitchen tilted. I pressed my free hand flat against the table to keep myself in the chair. December. It was now March. 3 months. My daughter had been gone for 3 months, and I was finding out from her neighbor because no one in my family had seen fit to tell me. The children I managed. My voice came out unrecognizable, scraped thin. "Lily and Owen. Where are they?" "They went into foster care," Margaret said, and I heard the grief in her voice, the particular kind that belongs to a neighbor who watched something terrible happen and could do nothing to stop it. "Buncombe County placed them right away. That's the county here in Asheville when a child has no parent and no family member steps forward. the county takes temporary custody and begins looking for either a relative or an approved foster family. They've been in a temporary placement since December. A good family, Hannah's social worker told me. But temporary. Temporary, I repeated. Yes. They're waiting for someone permanent to come forward. Something moved through my chest. Then not grief, not yet, because grief requires time, and I had not yet had any, but something that felt like recognition. Like the specific weight of a responsibility that has been waiting for you to arrive and finally sees you walking toward it. Ms. Calloway. I said, did the hospital contact Hannah's family when she passed her next of kin? They did, she said. I know because I gave them the emergency contact information from Hannah's phone myself. She had 2 names listed. Yours and... She hesitated. And a Daniel Hayes. Her brother, I think she said. My jaw locked. He was contacted, I said. It was not a question. The hospital told me they reached everyone on the list, Margaret said carefully. I don't know what conversations happened after that. I only know that no one came for the children. I thanked her. I asked her if she would be willing to speak with a county representative if it came to that. And she said yes, without hesitating. Said Hannah had been the kindest neighbor she'd ever had. Said Owen used to bring her dandelions from the front yard like they were roses, and she had pressed every single one. Her voice broke again when she said that, and mine broke with it, and for a moment, 2 strangers on opposite ends of a phone line just breathed together in the wreckage of a loss neither of us had been prepared for. She talked about you, Margaret said before we hung up. She talked about you the way people talk about someone they're still hoping to hear from. Right up until the end. She hadn't given up on you, Mr. Hayes. I set the phone down on the table. Then I put both hands over my face and I wept. Not quietly. Not with any dignity. I wept the way a man weeps when he has held something at arm's length for years because he was afraid of what it was, and then finally looks at it directly and finds out it was worse than he feared, and also more precious than he had allowed himself to imagine. My shoulders shook. My chest heaved. The sound I made in that empty kitchen was the sound of 15 years of distance collapsing all at once. December. She had died in December. Owen had brought the neighbor dandelions like they were roses. Lily had drawn me tall because her mama said I was tall. And Daniel Hayes had received a phone call from a hospital in Asheville and had said no. Had driven to work or to dinner or wherever he had gone that day and had said no and had never once picked up the phone to tell his father. When I could breathe evenly again, I opened the notepad. I wrote 2 things beneath Hannah's address. Buncombe County Department of Social Services. And below that, I am a relative and I want to be considered. I did not know yet that those 10 words were the most important ones I would say in the next 6 months. But I was going to find out. I went back through the box the following week. I had left it on the kitchen counter, still sorted the way I had arranged it, that first night. Oldest to newest 48 pieces of Hannah's life spread across my table like a map of everything I had missed. I had not been able to look at it for 4 days. Then, on a Sunday evening when the apartment was quiet, and the street outside was quiet, and there was nothing left to distract me from what I still had not finished, I sat back down. I needed to read them in order. All of them. From the very beginning to the very end. Not to punish myself. I had spent enough of my life doing things because I felt I deserved the pain of them, but because Hannah had written them in order one after the other, year after year, and the least I could do was read them the way she had written them, with patience, with attention, with the full weight of my presence, which was the one thing she had never been able to get from me while she was alive. It took 2 evenings. I learned things about my daughter, that I had no right to learn this way, secondhand, in retrospect, from letters that were never meant to be read posthumously. I learned that she had a laugh that her coworkers teased her about because it was too loud for the break room. I learned that Owen had a stuffed elephant named Gerald, who had to be in the bed or sleep was impossible. I learned that Lily, at age 7, had decided she was going to be a marine biologist, and Hannah had taken her to the aquarium in Chattanooga and watched her press her face against the glass of the shark tank for 45 minutes without moving. I learned that Hannah had been a magnificent mother, and I had missed every year of it. By the time I reached the letters from 2020 and 2021, something in the tone had shifted. Not dramatically. Hannah was not a dramatic person, never had been even as a child. She processed things. Quietly, turned them over, came back to them later with conclusions instead of outbursts. But there was a new weight to her words in those years. A carefulness. Like a person who has decided to step more lightly because the ground has proven untrustworthy. The last letter of 2020 was shorter than the others. She wrote about Owen's breathing, about a new medication the pediatrician had started him on, about Lily losing a library book and being genuinely heartbroken about it. Normal things. And then at the end, almost as an afterthought, I don't know if these letters are reaching you anymore, Daddy. Something feels different, but I'm going to keep sending them. I need you to know that I'm still here. I set that letter down and looked at the bottom of the box. There was one more thing in it, a piece of paper folded into quarters torn from a yellow legal pad. No envelope. No stamp. No address. Just the paper folded and placed at the very bottom, like something that had been put there and then covered over and then forgotten, or like something that had been kept deliberately because its author wanted to be able to find it again. I unfolded it with fingers that had gone cold. Daniel's handwriting. I knew it before I finished opening the first fold. Bold, slightly too large, the letters of a man who has always taken up more space than he needs. Hannah, do not come back here. Dad doesn't want to see you. You had your chance, and you walked away from this family. If you keep sending these letters or show up at the house again, I will make sure you regret it. Stop embarrassing yourself and all of us. This is the last time I'm going to say this. Daniel, I read it once. Then I read it again. Then I set it down very carefully on the table the way you set down something fragile, even though it was just a piece of paper, and it was not fragile at all, and could not be hurt by anything I might do to it. Though you threatened her, I said. My voice came out hard and flat and completely steady, which surprised me because nothing else in my body was steady. My hands had gone cold all the way to the wrist. My jaw ached from clenching it. You put it in writing. You told your sister that her father didn't want to see her, and you threatened her, and you signed your name to it. Hannah had written 5 more letters after this one. I knew because I had read them all spread across this same table. 5 more letters over the next 4 years, sent to an address belonging to a man she had been told did not want to hear from her, because she had decided that whatever Daniel said, she was going to keep trying. That was who my daughter was. She had received a threatening letter from her brother, and she had folded it up somewhere private, and she had picked up a pen and written to me again anyway. Because she was her mother's daughter, and her mother had never once in her life given up on someone she loved without exhausting every possible option first. I picked up Daniel's letter and folded it back along its original creases with hands that had finally stopped shaking because I had moved past shaking into something colder and more purposeful. I carried it to my bedroom. I placed it inside the manila folder I had already started alongside the copies I had made of Hannah's letters. The folder went on the shelf above my desk between the Raleigh property tax documents and the warranty paperwork for my refrigerator. Evidence belongs somewhere you can find it. I went back to the kitchen, poured the cold coffee down the drain, and started a fresh pot. I had a call to make in the morning to Buncombe County Department of Social Services, and I needed to be clear-headed when I made it, because the woman on the other end of that call was going to ask me a question, and my answer was going to start something that could not be undone, and I did not want to undo it. Not for anything. The drive from Raleigh to Asheville takes 3.5 hours on a good day longer when you are 68 years old, and your mind keeps pulling you off the road and into a version of the past you are still trying to fully understand. I left before sunrise. I needed the dark hours to think, and I needed to arrive before I talked myself into being less than what those children deserved from me. The Buncombe County Department of Social Services building sat off Cox Avenue, a low brick structure with a parking lot that needed resurfacing and a lobby that smelled exactly the way Margaret Calloway had warned me it would, industrial cleaner and something underneath it, older that might have been coffee or might have been exhaustion. A woman at the front desk directed me to a room at the end of a corridor. Room C, a supervised visit room. In the foster care system, when a relative comes forward to claim a connection to a child in temporary placement, the first meetings happen in a controlled environment with a caseworker present. This is called a supervised visit, and it exists to protect the children, not because the relative is assumed to be dangerous, but because children who have already lost everything cannot afford another loss, and the system has learned to be careful about who it lets in. I was glad for the carefulness. I had not earned the right to walk straight into those children's lives. I needed to earn it one room at a time. I sat in a plastic chair against the wall and waited. My knee bounced. I pressed my hand down on it, and it bounced anyway. I was wearing the good flannel shirt, the dark blue one I kept for church and job interviews and occasions where first impressions mattered. I had shined my boots. I had driven 230 miles, and I was sitting in a plastic chair trying to remember the last time I had been this frightened of a door opening. The door opened. The caseworker came in first, a young woman named Brianna, who had the brisk, warm efficiency of someone who cared deeply and had learned to pace herself so she could keep caring for years. Behind her came Lily. She was 10 years old, and she walked into that room the way a person walks into a place they have not decided to trust, yet shoulders back, chin level, eyes moving. She clocked the exits, clocked the caseworker's position, clocked me. In the first 5 seconds, she had assessed the entire room and filed her conclusions somewhere behind those steady brown eyes that were so much like Hannah's that my chest seized up and did not release. Owen came in behind his sister, and his hand found hers before he had even fully cleared the doorway. He was 7 and small for it, with Hannah's same slightly upturned nose and a gravity to his expression that belonged on a much older face. He was holding something against his chest with his free arm, cradling it, the way you carry something that has survived more than one move and cannot afford to be dropped again. A wooden boat, small enough to fit in 2 cupped hands. The wood was dark with age and handling worn smooth at the bow where small fingers had rubbed it for years. I could not breathe. I knew that boat. I had made it in my garage in the summer of 1987, the year Hannah turned 7. I had used a piece of walnut scrap from a job site and a set of carving tools I'd bought at a flea market, and I had worked on it for 3 evenings while Hannah sat on the workbench and talked to me about whatever 7-year-olds talk about, which is everything and nothing and all of it important. I had carved my initials into the hull before I gave it to her. Small letters, R.H. Owen was holding my initials against his chest in a room I had never been in before. "Hi," I said. My voice came out rougher than I intended. Brianna guided them to the table. We all sat down, Lily across from me, Owen beside his sister, close enough that their arms touched. Lily looked at me with the directness of a child who has decided that adults who deserve trust will prove it without being asked, and adults who do not deserve it will reveal that too. "You're our grandfather," she said. not a question, a statement being evaluated. Your mother's father, I said. Yes. She talked about you, Lily said, and the way she said it was careful, not warm, not cold, just precise, like she was handing me a piece of information and watching to see what I did with it. She said you were tall. She said you smelled like sawdust and coffee. My eyes burned so hot and fast I had to blink hard 3 times. That sounds about right, I managed. Owen had not taken his eyes off me. Those serious dark eyes taking my measure the same way Hannah used to take measure of things she wasn't sure about yet. He lifted the boat slightly, almost unconsciously, and I saw the hull catch the fluorescent light. Owen, I said gently. Where did you get that boat? He looked down at it, then back up at me. Mama gave it to us. She said her daddy made it when she was little. He ran his thumb along the carved letters. She said if we ever found him, we'd know it was the right person because he'd remember making it. The burning behind my eyes became something I could not blink away. I pressed my lips together hard and breathed through my nose and kept my hands flat on the table so he would not see them shaking. The letters say R.H., I said. Robert Hayes. That's my name. Owen stared at me for a long moment. Then he pushed the boat across the table toward me. Just slightly. An offering or a test, or both. Lily's voice came in before I could reach for it. Sharp and clear and aimed straight at me like a question that had been waiting a long time for the right room. My mom waited for you on your birthday. She drove us all the way from Asheville and we stood outside your house for 2 hours in the rain. Owen got a fever after. He missed a week of school. Her jaw was set. Her eyes were dry. She had cried her crying somewhere private before this room, and what was left was the clean, exact edge of a child who needed the truth more than she needed to be protected from it. Why didn't you come out? The question hit me somewhere below the sternum and stayed there. I wasn't home, I said. I didn't know you came. I was away that weekend and I didn't know. I leaned forward slightly. Lily, I want you to hear me say this clearly. I did not know your mother had been writing to me. I did not know she had tried to reach me. I found out 3 weeks ago, and the moment I found out I got in my car and I drove here. Lily's eyes narrowed slightly. She was processing, checking the story against what she already knew. If you didn't know, she said slowly, then why didn't she tell you she'd written? Like she thought she had, I said. The letters weren't getting to me. Someone was keeping them from me. I paused. That's not something I'm going to explain fully today, because it involves people I don't want to talk about in front of you. But I will tell you the truth, Lily. Every part of it when you're ready to hear it. She studied me for what felt like a very long time. Then she looked at Owen. Something passed between them, the specific wordless communication of siblings who have been each other's only constant, and Owen gave a small nod. Lily looked back at me. Okay, she said. We'll see. It was not forgiveness. It was not trust. It was something much more valuable, a door left open 1 inch by a 10-year-old girl who had every reason to keep it shut. Owen picked up the boat and held it out to me properly, this time both hands the way you hand something important to someone you have decided might be worth it. I took it with hands that were absolutely shaking now, and I did not try to hide it. I drove home from Asheville that evening with the windows down and the radio off and Owen's wooden boat on the passenger seat beside my notepad, because I could not make myself put it in the glove box. Some things need to stay where you can see them. The mountains were purple in the late light, and the highway curved through them in long, patient bends. And I drove those bends and thought about a 10-year-old girl who had sat across a table from me and said, "We'll see," with the composure of someone twice her age. I thought about a 7-year-old boy who had pressed his grandfather's initials against his chest for however many months since December, carrying something his mother had told him to carry until he found the right person. Hannah had prepared them for me. Even when she could not know whether I would ever come, she had kept my name alive in that house. She had given Owen the boat and told him the story of it. She had let Lily know that I was tall and that I smelled like sawdust and coffee. She had kept the door open on her end for 9 years, right up until the night she drove into the rain on Interstate 26, and the door closed without warning. I did not cry on the drive home. I had used up what I had in Brianna's parking lot, sitting in my truck for 20 minutes before I could see well enough to drive. What replaced the crying was something quieter and more purposeful, the specific clarity that comes when a person finally understands exactly what they need to do and exactly why they need to do it. When I got home, I made coffee, sat at the kitchen table, and picked up the last letter. I had been saving it. That sounds strange, saving a letter from a woman who was already gone, but I had needed to read the others first, needed to understand who Hannah had become before I read what she had written last. The postmark said November 14th, 2024, 5 weeks before she died. Her handwriting was the same as always, careful, slightly left-leaning the lowercase g's, with their particular closed loop that I had teased her about when she was 12 and learning cursive. "Daddy," she wrote. "I know I keep sending these and I don't know if they're reaching you, but I need to keep trying. That's just who I am, I guess, or maybe who you raised me to be, even if neither of us quite knew it at the time." My throat tightened until it ached. Owen's lungs have been bad this winter. The mountains hold the cold air down in the valley, and his doctor says the altitude isn't helping. She mentioned that coastal air, lower elevation, cleaner particulate count, the salt, can make a significant difference for kids with his kind of reactive airway disease. I've been researching towns on the North Carolina coast. Emerald Isle keeps coming up. The schools are decent and the medical infrastructure has improved a lot. Daddy, do you remember when I was little and you used to talk about buying a beach house someday? You said you'd sit on the porch and watch the tide and not do a single useful thing all morning. I used to think that sounded boring. Now I think it sounds like heaven. I keep picturing a house where the windows face the water and the kids can fall asleep to the sound of the ocean instead of the highway. A place where Owen can breathe. A place where Lily can stop being in charge of everything for 5 minutes. I don't know if that place exists for us, but I think it might exist for you. And I think if it did, maybe we could find our way there together someday. I love you, Daddy. I haven't stopped. I won't. Hannah. I folded the letter closed. Then I unfolded it and read it one more time. Then I got up from the table, walked to the window, and stood there looking at the streetlights of Dunmore Avenue and the neighbor's oak tree, and the ordinary Tuesday night surface of a world that had no idea what had just happened in my kitchen. And I said out loud to Hannah, to the window, to whatever was left of her, in the spaces between things, I found it. I'm going to find it. The next morning, I called Sandra. She answered on the second ring, cheerful and professional, and I told her I was looking for a 4-bedroom house near the water on the North Carolina coast. Good school district, close to medical facilities, second row from the beach, or better for the flood insurance. She asked when I wanted to start looking. "This weekend," I said. We looked at 6 houses over 3 Saturdays. Sandra was patient and did not ask unnecessary questions, which I appreciated more than I could have told her. The 5th house was almost right. The 6th was on a quiet street in Emerald Isle, second row from the Atlantic, with a kitchen that caught the morning light and 2 bedrooms at the end of the south-facing hall that looked like they had been waiting for someone to put something good in them. I went upstairs. There was a small window on the landing, and if you stood at it and leaned left, you could see the lighthouse on the point, white against the gray October sky, blinking its patient, reliable rhythm across the water. I stood at that window until Sandra called up from the kitchen. "Mr. Hayes, did you want to see the second bathroom?" "Sandra." I called back. "What's the asking price?" she told me. "I'll offer full ask," I said. "Today." A pause. Then her voice careful and warm. "Are you sure you don't want to sleep on it?" I thought about Hannah's letter on my kitchen table. I thought about Owen's boat on my passenger seat. I thought about Lily saying we'll see with that 1-inch open door. "I stopped waiting for the right moment 15 years ago," I said. "This is the right house." Before I tell you what Diane said to me that afternoon in her office, the thing that made my blood run cold and confirmed every suspicion I had been trying not to have about my own son, drop a "stay" in the comments right now, so I know you're still with me. Because what comes next is the part I never saw coming, even after everything I had already found in that garage. This story contains some fictional elements woven in for storytelling purposes. If that's not what you're here for, no hard feelings, you can step away now. But if you're staying, I promise you, the next part is worth it. Diane Prescott had an office that suited her small, organized nothing on the desk that did not need to be there. A framed photograph of a coastline on the wall, a stack of manila folders color-coded along the edges, a coffee maker on the filing cabinet that looked like it had been running since before I was born. She was 52, with reading glasses pushed up into silver-streaked hair and the particular stillness of a person who has heard every version of every story and learned to wait for the one that is actually true. I had met with her 3 times before this afternoon. Each time she asked me a different set of questions that were all underneath the same question. Are you the safe choice for 2 children who have already lost everything? I had answered honestly every time, because Diane Prescott was not a woman you tried to manage. You could see it in the way she held a pen, not writing, just holding, watching, filing. I sat down across from her on a Thursday in June, and she looked at me over the top of her reading glasses with an expression I had not seen from her before. "Mr. Hayes," she said, "I need to tell you something, and I want to tell you directly because I believe you deserve to hear it that way." My hands tightened on the arms of the chair. "Go ahead." 3 weeks ago, a man contacted this office. He identified himself as Daniel Hayes, your son. He said he was reaching out because he was concerned about your fitness to care for 2 young children. She opened the folder in front of her and read from her notes without looking up. He stated that you had been experiencing memory lapses, that you had left a gas stove unattended on 2 occasions in the past month, that in his professional opinion, as your son, he believed the stress of a kinship placement could be detrimental to your health and, by extension, to the welfare of the children. The anger that moved through me was the cold kind, the kind that does not make noise. "He came to you directly," I said, "without telling me." "He did." Diane set the folder down and looked at me fully. "I want to be clear about how I am handling this. The contact has been logged as unsolicited, meaning it was initiated without your knowledge or consent. In home study evaluations, unsolicited contacts from family members who stand to be affected by a placement decision are noted in the file, but they carry a specific weight. They tell me as much about the person making the contact as they do about the subject of the contact." She paused. "Do you understand what I am telling you? You're telling me that Daniel calling you hurt his credibility more than it hurt mine. I'm telling you that I've been doing this work for 22 years, she said, and when a family member contacts a caseworker in private to undermine a relative's placement application, I ask myself what that family member stands to lose if the placement succeeds." I exhaled slowly. "He thinks he's protecting his inheritance. I don't make assumptions about motivation," Diane said, "but I do make notes." She clicked her pen once. "Is there anything you want to tell me about your son that would help me understand the full picture?" I looked at her for a moment. A woman who had heard every version of every story, who held her pen and waited. "There's something I need to show you," I said. "Not today, I don't have it with me. But before the final home visit, I want to put something on the table between us. Something that will tell you exactly who Daniel is and what he has been doing for the last 9 years." Diane made a note. I look forward to seeing it. I drove back to Raleigh that evening, and the anger in my chest kept the road company the whole way. I thought about Daniel sitting across from Diane in that small, organized office wearing his concerned son expression, his voice low and reasonable, laying out his fabrications with the same confidence he used for everything. Memory lapses, gas stove, detrimental to his health. And then I remembered something I had not thought about in 3 years. A birthday trip, my 65th birthday. Daniel had called 2 weeks before and offered out of nowhere to take me to Lake Lure for the weekend. 2 nights at a cabin fishing, no agenda. He'd said it with so much warmth that I had been genuinely moved. My son planning something for me. I remembered thinking maybe things are getting better between us. I remembered feeling grateful. I had been gone Friday through Sunday. Hannah had come on Saturday. She had driven 2 hours from Asheville with a 7-year-old Lily and a 4-year-old Owen in car seats, arrived at my house on Dunmore Avenue, knocked on the door, waited on the porch, waited in the car, waited in the rain for 2 hours before she finally drove away. Daniel had known she was coming. He had to have known he was the one she had written to, the one she kept trying to reach through, the one whose name was on the emergency contact list at her children's school. He had known she was planning to come for my birthday, and he had taken me 3 hours in the opposite direction for a weekend of fishing that I had interpreted as affection. That was not a fishing trip. I said to the windshield, to the dark highway, to no one. My knuckles whitened on the steering wheel. That was a schedule conflict you manufactured. You planned it for her. You took me away so she would stand outside my house in the rain with my grandchildren and eventually give up and drive home. The anger in my chest had stopped being cold. It had gotten hot and bright and clarifying the way a fire gets when you finally give it enough air. I pressed harder on the accelerator. I had work to do. I closed on the house on a Thursday in late June. Sandra handed me the keys in the parking lot of the title company, 2 sets on a plain metal ring, heavy and real, in my palm. And I sat in my truck for a few minutes, just holding them, before I started the engine. I did not go directly to the hardware store. I drove to the house first, let myself in through the front door, and walked every room in the late afternoon quiet. The cellars had left it clean. The kitchen smelled like lemon soap and old wood. The living room had good light, and the echo that empty rooms have, the kind that disappears the moment someone fills them with furniture and voices and the ordinary sounds of a life being lived. I walked down the hall to the 2 rooms at the end. The right-hand room faced south and caught the afternoon sun at an angle that turned the walls gold. The left-hand room had a wide window seat built into the wall beneath the glass, deep enough to sit in looking out toward the water. I stood in the left-hand room for a long time, one hand on the window seat, and I thought about a 10-year-old girl who had been watching every exit in every room she entered for months, waiting for the next thing to go wrong. She needed somewhere to watch the water instead. I drove to the hardware store and bought 2 gallons of paint, 2 brushes, a tray, a roller, a tarp, painter's tape, and a box of screws for the curtain rod brackets. The woman at the register rang everything up and asked if I was doing a renovation. 2 bedrooms, I said. Fun project, she said. Kids' rooms. I looked at her. My throat did something complicated. Yes, I said. Kids' rooms. I worked every day off for 3 weeks. The right-hand room I painted a soft ocean blue, not bright, not loud, the color of the sky about an hour after sunrise, when the light is still coming in, sideways, and the world is quiet. I had found a star lamp at a small shop in Beaufort, the kind that projects constellations onto the ceiling when the room is dark, because Margaret Calloway had told me Owen was afraid of the dark in the weeks after December, and I was not going to let him be afraid of the dark in my house. The left-hand room I painted a warm white that changed with the light cream in the morning, almost silver by afternoon. I built 2 small shelves into the alcove beside the window seat and sanded them smooth by hand the way I'd learned to finish wood at Harper's, until the grain came up clean and the surface was something you wanted to run your fingers along. I made 2 signs on a Thursday evening, sitting at the kitchen table with a wood-burning tool I had not used since Hannah was small. Careful letters. Steady hand. Lily. Owen. I set them on the shelf in each room and did not hang them on the doors. I had hung hope on a door once before a different door, in a different life 12 years before any of this, and had to take it down. I was not going to do that again until the county said the word. On the last Saturday of July, I carried Owen's wooden boat upstairs and set it on the windowsill of the blue room hull facing the water. The lighthouse blinked its steady rhythm out on the point. I stood there looking at it for a while, the boat and the lighthouse and the Atlantic, going about its old patient business beyond the dunes. "She sent you to find me," I said to the boat, to Owen, to Hannah. "You found me, I'm not going anywhere." Then I went downstairs, poured myself a glass of water, and sat at the kitchen table with the folder I had been building since March. Inside copies of all 48 letters organized by year. Daniel's letter to Hannah in its own clear sleeve. The documentation from Buncombe County confirming that Daniel Hayes had been contacted by Riverside Medical Center in December regarding Hannah Reed, and that no response had been received. Margaret Calloway's contact information. My own written account of finding the box in Daniel's garage. Evidence belongs somewhere organized. And then there was the other thing. The thing I had only understood fully on the drive back from Diane's office that June afternoon. 6 months before I found the box, Daniel had come to me with a story about a car loan. $8,000, he'd said. Just a loan. Down payment, he'd said. Claire needed it for work. I had given him the money without thinking twice. That was what fathers did, I had always believed. You helped when you could, but that $8,000 had a different history that I had not known about when I handed it over. I had been putting money aside that year quietly, a little at a time, because I had begun to feel in the way you feel things without evidence when you have lived long enough that something about Hannah's disappearance was not the story I had been told. I had been saving to hire someone to look for her. A private investigator. I had almost called one twice. Daniel had come for the money before I called. The SUV in his garage was black and polished and had cost just under $40,000. His portion of the down payment had been $8,000. His wife's work commute, he had explained, required something reliable. I looked at that SUV every time I pulled into his driveway. I looked at it, and I thought about what $8,000 might have found if it had gone where I had meant to send it. I put the folder on the shelf above my desk, between the property tax documents and the warranty for the refrigerator, and I went to bed in a house that smelled like fresh paint and ocean air and the particular possibility of a thing not yet finished. 2 rooms at the end of the hall. Both doors open. Both waiting. There was one more meeting with Diane before the final home visit, and I had been turning it over in my mind for 3 weeks. What to say? How much to say? Whether the saying of it would help, or whether it would open something that could not be managed once it was open. By the time I sat down across from her on a Tuesday afternoon in late July, I had stopped turning it over. I had made my decision the way I make most decisions, by recognizing that the only alternative was worse. I had brought the folder. I set it on the desk between us and kept my hand on top of it for a moment. The way you keep your hand on a door before you open it into a room you are not certain about. Then I opened it. Diane, I said, I want you to have the complete picture before you come to the house. Not just the picture of who I am, the picture of who might walk through my door while you're standing in my living room. She set her pen down and folded her hands, and gave me the full weight of her attention, which was considerable. 22 years of home studies had given Diane Prescott the ability to listen in a way that most people never learn, not waiting for her turn to speak, not organizing her response while you were still talking, just receiving. It was one of the most valuable things I had encountered in another person in a long time. Start at the beginning, she said. So I did. I walked her through all of it. The box in Daniel's garage, the 48 letters, the postmarks spanning 9 years. The way Hannah had written to me through all of it, through Lily starting school, through Owen's diagnosis, through the birthday visit in the rain, through Daniel's threatening letter, through 5 more letters after that threatening one, because Hannah Reed was not a woman who gave up on the people she loved. I took out Daniel's letter, the one on yellow legal pad paper, the one I'd been carrying in a clear sleeve at the bottom of the folder since March, and I placed it in front of Diane. She read it. Her expression did not change, but her jaw tightened by a fraction, which on Diane's face was the equivalent of someone else slamming a fist on a table. "This is your son's handwriting," she said. "Yes." "And you have documentation confirming that—" "I have 39 years of birthday cards, Christmas notes and grocery lists in that same handwriting," I said. "But yes, if it needs to be formally verified, I have samples." Diane picked up her pen and wrote something. "Walk me through the timeline once more. When was this letter sent relative to Hannah's last correspondence with you?" "She received it in early 2020 based on where it was positioned in the box. She wrote 5 more letters to me after that. The last one is postmarked November 14th, 2024. My voice held steady. I had practiced keeping it steady. "She died 5 weeks after she wrote it." Diane set the pen down again. Her eyes met mine directly. "Mr. Hayes, I have to ask you something, and I want you to answer it as plainly as you answered everything else." "Go ahead." "Accuse, why are you telling me this now at this stage rather than at our first meeting?" I had expected the question. "Because at the first meeting, I was a stranger asking you to trust me with 2 children. If I had walked in with a folder full of documents about my son, it would have looked like I was trying to get ahead of something, managing the narrative before you could form your own impression." I paused. "Now you've had 4 months to form your impression of me independent of Daniel. Now when I put this in front of you, it lands differently." Diane looked at me for a long moment. Then the corner of her mouth moved not quite a smile, but the suggestion of one, the kind that a professional allows herself when a person has said something she recognizes as true. "That is either a very calculated thing to say," she said, "or a very wise one." "It can be both," I said. She almost smiled properly at that. Then she picked up the folder and went through it methodically, each letter the documentation from Riverside Medical Center, confirming Daniel had been contacted in December. Margaret Calloway's signed statement, my written account of finding the box. When she finished, she set it down and folded her hands again. "Mr. Hayes, I want to be transparent with you about something. Based on everything in this folder and everything I have observed over the past 4 months, I am prepared to make a positive recommendation to the county. The final home visit is procedural at this point. A box to check, not an evaluation. I expect to change my conclusion." The relief that moved through my chest was so sudden and so complete that my eyes burned hot. I pressed my lips together and breathed through my nose and waited until I was certain my voice would work properly. "Thank you," I said. "Don't thank me yet," she said, but not unkindly. "There is still the matter of the home visit itself. You mentioned that your son is aware you've purchased the house. He is, and he's aware I'm pursuing placement of Lily and Owen." I looked at her steadily. "I expect he may attempt to be present during your visit, possibly with his wife." Diane's pen stilled. "And you would like me to be prepared for that?" "I would like you to arrive early," I said, "before 10 o'clock. She studied me with those 22 years of home studies behind her eyes. "You're expecting them at 10. My son told me he would send a moving truck at 10, I said. "He believes he is coming to relocate my belongings to the garage so his wife can have the master bedroom." A pause. Diane's expression did not flicker. "And what are you expecting to happen when the truck arrives and finds me already in the house?" "I am expecting the truth to be visible in a way that cannot be undone afterward," I said. No private conversations, no managed narratives, just what actually happens in front of a witness whose entire job is to see clearly and write it down." Diane looked at me for what felt like a very long time. Outside her window, a mockingbird was going through its entire repertoire in the parking lot oak tree, cycling through cardinal wren blue jay, back to cardinal again. "I'll arrive at 9:45, she said. I drove home with the windows down and my hand resting loose on the wheel, and the mockingbird's song still going in my head, cycling through all its borrowed voices, and I thought, that is exactly what Daniel has been doing for 15 years. Borrowing voices, telling other people's stories in his own words, making himself the author of a narrative that belonged to someone else. Tomorrow, the author was going to change. I was awake before 5 on the morning of the visit. Not because I had slept badly, I had slept better than I expected, the deep final sleep of a man who has finished preparing and has nothing left to do but wait. I was awake because the house was different in the early morning, before the light came all the way in, and I had learned in the weeks since I moved in that those first hours were worth being present for. I made coffee, a full pot enough for 2. I got out 2 mugs, the same 2 mugs I had unpacked first, back on the night Daniel called about the master bedroom. Because some things your mother teaches you stay in your hands long after she is gone. I set them on the counter beside the coffee maker and looked at them for a moment and thought about all the mornings that had led to this one. At 9 o'clock, I walked down the hall and stood before the 2 rooms. Both doors open, both rooms exactly as I had left them, the blue walls catching the morning light, the star lamp on Owen's dresser, the wooden boat on the windowsill facing the Atlantic. In Lily's room, the window seat cushion was straight, the shelves empty and waiting the warm white walls holding the early sun like they had been built for the purpose. I went back to the kitchen. At 9:43, tires on gravel, I went to the front window and watched Diane Prescott's gray sedan pull into the driveway. She got out with her folder under one arm and her coffee thermos in the other hand, wearing a navy blazer and the expression of a woman who arrived prepared to every appointment she had ever kept in 22 years. I opened the door before she reached the porch. "Good morning, Mr. Hayes," she said. "Good morning, Diane. Coffee's on." She came in, and I poured her a mug, and she accepted it without ceremony. And we walked to the house together, the way we had done it twice before, methodically, room by room, Diane making her quiet notes. She checked the smoke detectors in the hallway, ran the hot water tap in the bathroom, to confirm the temperature was below 120 degrees, examined the cabinet under the kitchen sink, where I kept the cleaning supplies, all of which were behind a child safety latch. She noted the stair railing and its soundness. She noted the deadbolt on the back door, When we reached the end of the hall, she stopped. She stood in front of the two open doors for a long moment. She looked at the sign on the right-hand door, Owen letters burned carefully into pale wood. She looked at the crayon drawing taped below it, the one Owen had made me during our third supervised visit, a house with 4 windows and 2 small figures out front, and a very tall man standing in the doorway with a crooked line for a smile. She looked at the star lamp, at the wooden boat on the windowsill. She did not say anything. She wrote something in her folder instead, something longer than her usual notes, and I did not try to read it. We were standing in the living room with our coffee going cold in the 2 mugs, when I heard it, the low diesel rumble of something much larger than a passenger vehicle coming down the residential street outside. The sound was wrong for the neighborhood. Too heavy, too deliberate. My stomach did not drop. My hands did not shake. I had been ready for this sound for 3 weeks. I set my mug on the windowsill and went to look. The truck was white with dark green lettering along the side panel, Coastal Moving and Storage, and below that, a phone number I recognized from the Google search I had done the week Daniel made his announcement. 2 men were visible in the cab. Behind the truck, close enough to be part of the same convoy, came Daniel's black SUV. They were 4 minutes early. My family is always early when they think they're taking something, I said. Diane moved. She did it without being asked. Set her mug down, picked up her folder and walked to the far side of the living room, to the bookshelf in the corner that gave her a clear line of sight to the front door and the mouth of the hallway. She opened the folder to a fresh page, uncapped her pen. I prefer to observe, unless a child is in danger, she said. There are no children in the house this morning. No, I said. There aren't. Footsteps on the porch. Then the particular sound of a key being tried in a lock, the small, precise scrape of metal against metal followed by resistance. Then again. Then a third time, with more force, the way a person tries a key when they are certain the key is right and cannot understand why the door is not cooperating. I crossed the living room. I put my hand on the deadbolt, the new one, the one I had installed the week I moved in, the one that did not match any key Daniel had ever been given, because I had never given Daniel a key to this house, or any intention of doing so. I turned the deadbolt and opened the door. Daniel stood on the porch with a key in his hand and an expression on his face that I had not seen from him before, the expression of a man who has arrived somewhere certain and found the landscape rearranged. Behind him, Claire was already looking past both of us toward the hallway, her phone in one hand and the particular bright energy of a person who believes the morning is already won. Behind Claire came 2 men in matching dark green polo shirts, hand trucks folded under their arms, a stack of flattened moving boxes between them. Daniel's jaw tightened when he saw my face. He looked at the key in his hand. He looked at the door. He looked back at me. "Good morning, Daniel," I said. My voice came out level and unhurried the way it does when you have had a long time to practice the tone. "I changed the locks the week I moved in. Come in." I stepped back and held the door open. Daniel walked into my house. Claire was already 3 steps ahead of him, her eyes moving fast around the room, the furniture I had chosen, the art I had hung, the 2 mugs on the counter, and the woman standing very still by the bookshelf with a folder open to a fresh page and a pen in her hand. Claire's gaze passed over Diane, the way it passed over everything that was not the hallway, quickly, without registering, already decided about what mattered and what did not. She moved toward the hallway, and I watched her go, and I did not stop her because everything that was going to happen next was already in motion, and all I had to do was let it arrive. Claire did not look at me when she walked past. She looked at the hallway, at the width of it, at the length of it, at the 2 closed doors at the far end. The way a person looks at real estate, they have already decided belongs to them and are now evaluating for renovation potential. Her phone was in her hand, and her thumb was moving across the screen, and I heard the small chime of a social media notification going out she had been posting since the car, I would learn later, a live stream of the drive down that her followers had been watching in real time. She had told them she was setting up a beach house. She had shown them the sunrise over the highway and the moving truck ahead of them, and her own face bright and certain, captioned with something about finally getting what your family deserves. She had 400 viewers by the time she walked through my front door. Daniel came in behind her, and he did something that hit me harder than I expected. He went straight to the armchair in the corner of the living room. My armchair, the one I had bought at an estate sale in Morehead City, because the leather was the right color and the seat was the right depth for a man whose lower back had been complaining since his early 50s. He sat down in it, not perched on the edge the way you sit in someone else's furniture. Settled. The way you sit in a chair you have decided is yours. He picked up the remote control from the side table, out of pure habit, without thinking. The way you pick up a remote in your own living room when you have sat in that chair 100 times. My jaw tightened so hard, I felt it behind my molars. But I kept my position near the window, and I kept my hands loose at my sides, and I let Daniel sit in my chair and hold my remote. And I did not say a word, because the morning had not yet arrived, at the part where words were mine to use. The two movers came in behind Daniel. Hand trucks unfolded the stack of flattened boxes between them. The older one, a broad man in his 40s, with a gray beard and the permanently evaluating eyes of someone who has moved a great many households and learned to read a room before committing, glanced at me as he came through the door. His gaze moved from my face to Daniel's settled posture in the armchair, to Diane standing quiet by the bookshelf with her folder open. Something shifted behind his eyes. He slowed down. He had not been told there would be other people in this house. "Ma'am," he said to Claire, his voice careful. "Where did you want us to start?" Claire was already at the mouth of the hallway, her phone still up, pivoting slightly to get the doors in frame. "The rooms at the end of the hall," she said without turning around. "Both of them. Everything comes out to the garage first. We'll sort it from there." The younger mover looked at the older one. The older one looked at me. I held his gaze and said nothing, because I did not need to say anything yet. What I needed was for Claire to keep going exactly where she was going. She reached the right-hand door first. She stopped. Her phone came down an inch. She was looking at the wooden sign Owen burned into pale wood and at the crayon drawing below it, the house with 4 windows and the 2 tall man in the doorway and the 2 small figures on the front lawn. Her head tilted slightly the way it does when you encounter something that does not match the picture you had constructed in advance. "What is all this?" she said half to herself. The way you say something when you expect no answer, because you have already decided the answer doesn't matter. She reached up. Her fingers found the corner of Owen's drawing, and she began to peel it from the door, the tape coming away in a small, sharp sound that went through me like a current through old wire. I crossed the room. I did not run. I want to be clear about that. I walked the way I walk when something needs to be handled immediately and carefully, and without the kind of force that gives the other person a story to tell about you afterward. Quick, exact. 68 years old, and my legs still knew how to cover ground when the ground needed covering. I heard my own voice come out lower and steadier than anything else in my body felt in that moment. "Take your hands off my grandchildren's door." The word landed in the hallway and spread outward like a stone dropped in still water. Claire's hand came off the drawing. Her fingers pulled back as if the door had burned them. She turned around slowly, and her face did something I had not seen from her before. Not anger, not indignation, but genuine confusion, the kind that comes when the ground shifts under you before you have had time to brace. "You're what?" she said. From the living room, I heard the armchair creak. Daniel had straightened up. The remote was no longer in his hand. The older mover had stopped moving entirely. He was standing at the mouth of the hallway with his hand truck and his gray beard and his permanently evaluating eyes, and he was watching me the way you watch a man when you are beginning to understand that you have walked into the wrong kind of job. The ocean came through the window at the end of the hall, that slow, patient sound in and out, like the house itself was breathing and had been breathing all along and was not going to stop for any of this. "Your grandchildren," Claire said again, louder this time, her voice climbing toward something that was not quite anger yet but was looking for the stairs. "Robert, what are you talking about? You don't have grandchildren. That's the whole Daniel told me you don't have." She stopped, turned her head toward the living room where Daniel had risen out of the armchair. "Daniel, what is he talking about?" Daniel's face had gone the particular color of a man who has built something elaborate and is watching the first wall come down. Not pale. Something worse than pale, the grayish, stripped color of a face from which all performance has suddenly been removed. "Claire," he said. "Let me... What is he talking about?" Her voice cracked on the last word, sharp and high, and she was looking at her husband with an expression I recognized, not from knowing Claire, but from knowing what it looks like when a person begins to suspect that the map they have been given does not match the territory they are standing in. "Daniel, whose rooms are these?" Daniel opened his mouth. What came out was not words. It was the beginning of words, the shape of words, the posture of explanation, and then nothing, because there was no version of an explanation that worked in this hallway, in this light, in front of these witnesses, and some part of Daniel's mind, the part that had always been very good at calculating odds, had recognized that before his mouth had finished opening. I looked at my son, standing in my living room, with the remote control now on the side table where he had set it down without thinking, and I felt something move through me that was not triumph, and was not satisfaction, and was not grief exactly, though it had elements of all three. It was clarity. The specific aching clarity of a moment that has been coming for a very long time and has finally arrived. "Come back to the living room, Claire," I said. "Both of you. There are some things I need to show you." I led them back to the living room, because the hallway was not the right place for what came next. The hallway was narrow and the doors were there, and I did not want what I was about to say spoken in earshot of those signs. Those rooms, that drawing that Claire had almost taken down with her bare hands 45 seconds ago. The folder was on the side table where I had placed it that morning, next to the 2 cold mugs of coffee. I had put it there deliberately, the way you lay out tools before a job, so that when you need something, you do not have to search for it. I stood at the center of the room. Claire stood near the kitchen doorway, her phone finally dark in her hand. Her arms crossed tight across her chest, the way people hold themselves when they are trying to keep from flying apart. Daniel stood near the armchair he had vacated, one hand gripping the back of it, his knuckles showing white against the leather. The 2 movers had retreated to the edges of the room. The older one was near the front door. He had not unfolded his hand truck again. Diane stood by the bookshelf. She had not moved. She had not spoken. Her pen was moving steadily across the page of her folder. "Those rooms belong to my grandchildren," I said. My voice was even. I had worked for months to make it even for this moment, and it held. "Their names are Lily and Owen Reed. They are 10 and 7 years old. Their mother was Hannah Reed. I paused for exactly one beat. My daughter. Claire's arms dropped from her chest. You have a daughter. I had a daughter, I said. She died in December. A car accident on Interstate 26 in the rain. She was 39 years old. I looked at Daniel. The hospital contacted her next of kin. That included you. The color that had already left Daniel's face finished leaving. He was gripping the armchair so hard I could see the tension running up his forearm. Daniel. Claire's voice had dropped to something that was barely above a breath, but it carried the full weight of a woman whose world was rearranging itself at high speed. Did you know she died? Daniel's jaw worked. His mouth opened and closed and opened again. It was complicated, Claire. Hannah and I weren't, did you know? Not a question anymore. A wall going up brick by brick, word by word. Claire's eyes were filling, and her chin was trembling, and she pressed her lips together hard to stop it. But the trembling moved into her voice instead. Daniel, did the hospital call you and tell you your sister was dead, yes or no? The room waited. Daniel's hand released the armchair. His arm dropped to his side. Yes, he said. The word came out stripped of everything, no inflection, no cushioning, just the bare fact of it, landing in the room like something dropped from a height. Claire made a sound, then not a sob, not a gasp, something in between, the sound of a breath that has been knocked sideways. She pressed both hands over her mouth, and her eyes went wide and bright with tears that she was fighting hard and losing. You knew, she said through her hands. You knew your sister was dead, and you didn't tell your father. You didn't tell me. Her voice cracked clean through on the last word, and the tears spilled over, and she wiped them away with the back of her hand, with a fierceness that looked more like anger than grief. And those children, Lily and Owen, they went into foster care because you didn't. She stopped, pressed her hands over her mouth again. Her whole body shook with the effort of containing something too large for the space it was being held in. Claire, Daniel started. Do not. Her voice came back hard and bright and trembling. Do not talk to me right now. I reached into the folder. I took out the document I had been carrying for 5 months. Daniel's letter to Hannah, still in its clear sleeve. The yellow legal pad paper gone slightly soft at the folds from being handled so many times. I held it up so the room could see it. This is Daniel's handwriting, I said. He wrote this to Hannah in 2020. There is one more thing I need to show this room, but I am going to save it for when Daniel is ready to hear it. I set the letter face down on the side table. She wrote me 5 more letters after this one, I said. Because that was who Hannah was. She kept trying even when she was told not to. My voice held. I was proud of it for holding. And then she died, and her children went into a system full of strangers. And I found out about all of it 5 months ago in a box behind a toolbox in your garage, Daniel. 48 letters. 8 years. All of them sent to my address. None of them reaching me. Claire had stopped trying to hold her tears back. They were running freely now, and she was not bothering to wipe them, standing very still with her arms at her sides, and her phone dark on the floor where it had slipped from her fingers without her noticing. You told me those kids were strangers, she said to Daniel. Her voice was raw and scraped and entirely different from the voice she had used to instruct the movers 40 minutes ago. You told me they were trying to scam your father. You said their mother had walked away from this family years ago and never looked back. Each sentence landed separately, the way you set down something heavy and then pick up the next thing. You used me, Daniel. You told me lies, and you put me in that hallway, and you let me reach for that child's drawing. Daniel's mouth opened. Claire, I was trying to protect. Stop. The word came out of her like something thrown. Her whole body had gone rigid with a fury that was still competing with devastation, both of them visible at once on her face, neither of them winning yet. Stop protecting things. Stop managing things. Stop, just stop. From the bookshelf, Diane's voice came clearly into the room for the first time all morning. And I have copies of every document Mr. Hayes has referenced, she said. Her voice was calm and landed in the room the way a gavel lands, not loud, but final. They have been in the county file for 3 weeks. I'm Diane Prescott from Buncombe County Department of Social Services. I'm here for Mr. Hayes's kinship placement home study. She paused. I've seen everything I need to. Daniel turned to look at her. Fully, for the first time since he had walked in, and I watched my son's face do the thing it had never done in 39 years of being my son's face. I watched it give up. Daniel tried to recover. That was the thing about my son, he had always been good at recovering. 39 years of watching him and I had never once seen him stay down after the first blow. He would absorb it, recalibrate, find the angle that still worked, come back with something that sounded reasonable enough to create doubt. It was his greatest skill, and it had served him for decades, mostly at other people's expense. He straightened his shoulders. He found his voice. It came out controlled, which cost him something. I could see the effort of it in the muscles along his jaw. Leon, he said, I know how this looks, but you have to understand I was trying to protect you. Hannah had problems, real problems, instability, financial issues, relationships that weren't. I was trying to keep you from being pulled into something that would have hurt you. I made decisions I probably shouldn't have made, but I made them because I love you. The words were well chosen. They always were. I had heard variations of this speech my entire life as a father, the version where Daniel's worst actions got reframed as expressions of his deepest concern. He was fluent in it. He had been practicing since he was about 15. I looked at him for a moment. Then I reached into the folder. I took out the stack of copied letters, all 48, clipped together in chronological order, and I set them on the side table in front of him. The stack was thick. It made a substantial sound when it landed. These are copies, I said. The originals are in my bedroom closet. Every one of them is addressed to me. Every one of them was written by your sister. And every one of them was found in a cardboard box behind your toolbox in your garage. I tapped the top of the stack. You want to tell me how that happened, Daniel, if you were trying to protect me? Daniel's recovered composure began to fracture. A muscle jumped under his left eye. I kept them because I didn't think... You didn't think I should have them, I said. That's the only sentence that finishes correctly. Claire made a sharp sound from across the room. Not a word, something more raw than a word, the sound a person makes when a piece of information arrives that is too large to process quietly. Her arms wrapped around herself again, and she pressed her lips together so hard they went white at the edges. Shot to 8 years, Daniel, I said. She wrote to me for 8 years, through Lily starting school, through Owen's diagnosis, through your birthday. I paused. Through the birthday where you took me to Lake Lure so she would stand outside my house in the rain with 2 children in car seats and wait 2 hours and eventually drive home alone. Daniel's face crumpled at the edges. That's not what... She got a fever, Claire said from across the room. Her voice was shaking badly now. You told me Lake Lure was a gift for your father. You planned it. Her hands pressed over her mouth once hard, and when they came down, her eyes were red and blazing. You planned it, so a woman couldn't see her own father on his birthday, with her babies, in the rain. Daniel turned toward his wife. Claire, if you would just let me. There is one more thing, I said. My voice cut through the room the way a level cuts through noise on a job site, not loud, just exact. Daniel stopped, turned back. I reached into the folder again. I took out the letter in the clear sleeve, Daniel's letter, the yellow legal pad paper with the bold, slightly too large handwriting, and I held it up so the room could see it. This is also from your garage, I said. This is not Hannah's handwriting. I took it out of the sleeve. I read it aloud slowly, the way you read a legal document when you need every word to land individually. Hannah, do not come back here. Dad doesn't want to see you. You had your chance and you walked away from this family. If you keep sending these letters or show up at the house again, I will make sure you regret it. Stop embarrassing yourself and all of us. Daniel. The room went to a place beyond quiet. Claire's breath came in sharply, a raw, audible gasp that she did not try to suppress. Her hand flew up to cover her mouth again, and this time it was shaking, her whole hand trembling against her lips, her eyes flooding and spilling over before she could stop them. Yeah, she wrote me 5 more letters after she received this, I said, because she had more courage than most people I have ever known. My throat tightened around the last words, but I pushed through it. And then she died. And her children, my grandchildren, sat in a foster care system for 5 months, while a family that talks constantly about family said nothing and did not even ask their names. I set the letter down on top of the stack of 48. Diane's voice came from the bookshelf, steady and clear. I have certified copies of every document on that table in the Buncombe County placement file, she said. They have been there since the 22nd of July. They are part of the permanent record. Daniel looked at Diane. He looked at the folder in her hands. He looked at the pen still moving across the page. And something in my son's face did the thing I had been watching for since the moment he walked through my door. The performance stopped. Not gradually all at once, the way a power cut stops a machine. What was left underneath was just a man, 68 years old, standing in his father's living room, with nowhere left to go. Claire had stopped crying. That was the thing that told me the grief had finished its first pass, and something harder had moved in behind it. Her eyes were still red and swollen, but they were dry now, and they were fixed on Daniel with the particular focused quality of a woman who has been lied to and has finished being sad about it and has arrived at the next thing. You told me those children were strangers trying to take advantage of your father, she said. Her voice was low and absolutely steady, the steadiness of something that has stopped shaking because it has gone rigid. You told me their mother was a con artist. You said she had walked out on this family and never looked back, and that any claim they made on your father's estate was manipulation. She paused. Each sentence landed like a board being set down on a hard floor. You said that, Daniel, in our kitchen, 3 weeks ago. You looked me in the face and you said every word of that. Daniel reached toward her. Claire. She stepped back. Not dramatically, just one step, clean and deliberate, the way you step back from something you have decided not to touch. You turned me into the person who walked into this house and tried to take a child's drawing off a door, she said. Her voice cracked on the word child, and she pressed through it without stopping. You made me that person. I was on a live stream, Daniel. 400 people watched me walk in here to take a dead woman's children's rooms. Her voice broke fully on that last word, and she pressed her fist against her sternum and breathed through it visibly the way you breathe through pain that has a location. I posted about it. I told people I was setting up a beach house. 400 people. Claire. I can explain. You cannot. The two words hit the room like a door closing. There is no explanation for 48 letters. There is no explanation for that note you wrote her. There is no explanation for knowing your sister died and saying nothing to your own father for 3 months. Her voice was climbing again, raw and bright. There is no explanation I want to hear in this room right now. The older mover cleared his throat. I had almost forgotten about him. He was still near the front door, his hand truck folded against his leg, his partner beside him, with the stack of flattened boxes that had never been opened. He had the look of a man who has assessed a situation and made a decision and is waiting for a polite moment to act on it. "Sir," he said to Daniel. His voice was professional and entirely without apology. "We're going to step out." Daniel turned. "What? We don't move a man's belongings out of his own home," the mover said. "And we don't move a child's room. That's not a job we're able to do." He picked up one end of the flattened boxes and nodded to his partner, who took the other end. "We'll process the refund through the office. You can call about the deposit." He looked at me briefly, not long, just enough to convey something, and then he moved toward the door with the quiet efficiency of a man who has learned when a job has stopped being a job. The younger mover followed without speaking. The front door opened and closed, and the diesel engine on the street turned over and pulled away, and the sound of it diminished down the road, until there was nothing left but the ocean. Daniel stared at the closed door. The color had fully left his face now, and what was underneath was something I had not seen from him before. Not anger, not calculation, just the naked, awful exposure of a man who has spent his life controlling the story and has run out of story to control. Claire picked her phone up from the floor. She looked at the screen. Her jaw tightened so hard I could see it from across the room. "The live stream was still running," she said. "Flat. Destroyed. 312 people watched that man tell those movers to leave." She looked at Daniel one more time. The look lasted perhaps 3 seconds. It held no screaming and no theatrics, and nothing that could be appealed to or managed, because it was not anger anymore. It was something that had passed through anger and come out the other side as something quieter and more permanent. Then she pulled back her right hand and slapped Daniel across the face. The sound was sharp and clean in the quiet room. Daniel's head turned with it. He brought his hand up to his cheek slowly, his eyes wide, his breath coming fast. He looked at his wife with an expression I had never seen on my son's face before, the expression of a man who has finally, after a very long time, received exactly what he earned. Claire picked up her purse from where she had dropped it near the kitchen doorway. She looked at the hallway, at the 2 open doors, at the signs, at the drawing that was still exactly where Owen had put it, tape intact, not a corner lifted. Something moved through her face when she looked at that drawing. Something that was not anger and was not guilt exactly, but was in the same family as both. "Tell them I'm sorry," she said. "Not to Daniel, to me. When they come home. Tell Lily and Owen I'm sorry." Then she walked to the front door and opened it and walked out into the morning, and I heard her footsteps on the porch, and then on the gravel, and then nothing. Daniel stood in the middle of my living room with his hand on his cheek and the red mark of his wife's hand already rising on his skin. "You should leave Daniel," I said. Everyone else was gone. The movers, Claire, the sound of the truck. Even the ocean seemed quieter than usual, as if the house itself had exhaled and was holding the next breath. It was just the two of us, my son and me, in a living room that still smelled faintly of fresh coffee gone cold, with the morning light coming through the windows, at the angle it reaches when 10:30 is approaching, and the day has already decided what kind of day it is going to be. Diane had not left yet. She stood by the bookshelf, her folder closed, now her pen capped. She was giving us the room without leaving it, which was exactly right. Daniel stood near the armchair he had sat in when he first walked through the door. He had not sat back down in it. He was holding his hand against his cheek, where the red mark of Claire's palm was still visible, and he was looking at the floor, and for the first time in 39 years, I was looking at my son and seeing something I had not expected to find. He looked old, not old, the way I was. Old earned built into the frame over decades of work and weather. Old the way a thing looks when the structure holding it up has suddenly been removed. Hollowed. I felt something move through my chest that was not pity and was not forgiveness and was not the opposite of either. It was the specific ache of a father who has finally seen his son clearly all the way through and does not entirely like what the view contains. "Dad," Daniel said. His voice was rough, stripped of its usual finish. I know there's nothing I can." He stopped, started again. "I didn't think it would go this far." "Which part?" I said. He looked up. His eyes were red at the rims. "Any of it," he said. I told myself I was keeping the peace, keeping things manageable. Hannah had a way of stirring everything up, and I thought if I just... He pressed his hand harder against his cheek. I told myself it was easier. "Easier for who?" I said. He did not answer immediately. The word hung in the room between us, and he looked at it and did not pick it up. "For you," I said. "Because I spent 15 years thinking my daughter had chosen to disappear. I spent 15 years at Christmas dinners and Thanksgiving tables and birthday weekends with a hole in them that I had been told was Hannah's choice and was actually your management." My voice was even. I had worked very hard to keep it even, and it was holding though my hands had tightened at my sides, and my jaw was aching from the effort of staying inside the register I had chosen. "Easier is not the word I would use for any of that, Daniel. I know." His voice cracked down the middle. "I know, Dad. I'm sorry." "I know you are," I said. "But I need you to hear something, and I need you to hear it completely, so I'm going to say it plainly and only once." He raised his eyes to mine. They were wet now, and I let that be what it was, without responding to it, because there were things that needed to be said before we could arrive at anything else. "Still, you hid 48 letters from me," I said. "You threatened your sister in writing and kept the evidence in your own garage, which tells me some part of you knew even then that what you were doing was wrong because you kept the proof the way guilty people always keep the proof, not because they forget it, but because throwing it away makes the thing too real to live with." I paused. "You knew Hannah died in December. You let those children go to strangers. You said nothing to me for 3 months. And then you drove to my house with a moving truck to take their rooms." Daniel's hand came down from his cheek. His head dropped forward. His shoulders shook once a single hard convulsion, the kind of grief that has been compressed for a long time and releases badly when it finally goes. He pressed his fist to his mouth and breathed through it in jagged pulls, and I watched my son cry in my living room for the first time since he was 8 years old, and let the sight of it reach me the way it needed to without rushing to make it stop. "I know why you did it," I said when he had steadied enough to hear me. "You were afraid the picture would change. You had been calculating your position in this family since before Hannah's mother and I separated, and you knew that if Hannah came back, if she and I found our way to each other, the arithmetic shifted. The inheritance, the attention, the position at the center of things. It all divided differently." I looked at him steadily. "That is not an accusation, Daniel. That is me telling you what I see because I think you need someone to say it out loud so you can stop pretending it isn't what happened. I don't deserve those kids to know me. he said. His voice was wrecked, barely usable. Lily and Owen. I don't deserve to be their uncle. No, I said. You don't. Not yet. I let that sit for a moment. Whether you ever become someone they can know, that depends entirely on what you do from here. Not today. Today is finished. But in the months after today. Whether you become a man who faces what he did and does the work of becoming different, or whether you remain the man who stood in my garage and kept a box of his sister's letters and told himself it was easier. I walked to the front door and opened it. The salt air came in clean and steady. That choice is yours. I can't make it for you. I never could. Daniel walked toward the door. He moved slowly the way a man moves when the weight of a morning has settled fully into his body and he is carrying all of it. He stopped in the doorway and turned not all the way, just enough to show me his profile. I kept them because I was afraid, he said. The letters. I kept telling myself I'd deal with it later. I kept thinking I don't know what I was thinking. His voice broke again, softer this time. I was afraid that if you had them, she'd come back and everything would change and I'd lose. He stopped, shook his head. I don't even know what I thought I'd lose. Yes, you do, I said, not unkind, just true. He nodded once. A slow, surrendered nod, the kind that happens when a man has run out of alternatives to the truth and has finally decided to stand in it. Then he walked out. I watched him go down the front walk to the black SUV. Claire's car was already gone from the driveway, had been since she walked out, and he got in and sat there for a long moment before he started the engine. I could see him through the windshield, one hand on the wheel, looking at nothing, or at something only he could see. Then the engine started, and he pulled out and drove away down the street. Diane closed her folder and walked to where I was standing at the open door. Mr. Hayes, she said. Ms. Prescott. I'll write the visit report this afternoon. Her voice was professional and warm, in equal measure the combination she had clearly spent years calibrating. For the record, nothing that happened this morning harmed your case. A great deal of it strengthened it considerably. She paused, and her professional face softened by exactly 1 degree, the way it does when a person allows something true to show through the surface of something practiced. You built a very good home here, Mr. Hayes. She walked to her car. I watched her go. Then I was alone in the house for the first time all morning, and I stood at the open door and listened to the Atlantic. Do what it always does, breathe in and breathe out, patient and indifferent, and exactly the same as it had been before all of this, and would be long after. And I felt the specific grounded feeling of a man whose feet have found solid earth after a very long time of uncertain footing. I walked down the hall. I stood in front of the 2 open doors, the star lamp, the window seat, the wooden boat on the sill, initials facing the water. Nobody had taken anything. Everything I had built was still standing. Diane called on a Thursday morning in late August. I was at the kitchen window watching the tide pull back from the shore when my phone rang. I looked at the screen, took 1 slow breath, and answered. Mr. Hayes, she said, the county has approved the kinship placement. Lily and Owen Reed are cleared to come home. You can bring them whenever you're ready. My hand tightened on the phone so hard my knuckles ached. I'm ready, I said. I've been ready since March. A pause, and I heard something in it that Diane Prescott very rarely allowed into her professional voice. Something warm. I know you have, she said. Call me when they're settled. I told the children at our next supervised visit. Brianna brought them into the room, and they sat across from me the way they always did. Lily watchful, Owen close to his sister, the wooden boat on the table between us. Because Owen brought it to every visit, now the way some kids bring a stuffed animal and some kids bring a book, and Owen brought his grandfather's initials carved into a piece of walnut. I had rehearsed what I was going to say a dozen different ways. In the end, I set the rehearsal aside because Lily could hear the seams in a prepared speech from 20 feet, and I was not going to insult her with one. "The county said yes," I told them. "You're coming home, not for a visit to live, in the rooms with your names on the doors, for as long as there's a me." Owen's face broke open like sunrise, sudden and total, a grin so wide it took over his entire face and his whole body went with it, leaning forward, both hands flat on the table. "Is the star lamp really mine?" he demanded. "The one that makes the stars on the ceiling?" "It's yours," I said. "It was always yours." Lily did not move. She looked at me with those careful, exit-watching eyes, and I held her gaze, and did not look away, because she needed to see that I was not going to be the first one to break it. "For how long?" she said. Her voice was so quiet, I almost missed it under the hum of the building's ventilation system. But I had been waiting for that question since the day I met her, because it was the only question that mattered to a child who had been moved as many times as Lily had been moved. She was not asking out of hope. She was asking so she would know how much of herself it was safe to unpack. "For the rest of it," I said, "for as long as there's a me. Those are your rooms. Nobody is taking them. I am not a man who makes promises I don't intend to keep, Lily, so I am making this one carefully. You are coming home." She looked at me for a long time. Then she reached over and straightened the collar of Owen's shirt, adjusting it with the automatic precision of a girl who had been doing that particular thing since the night their mother didn't come home. Taking care of him, the way she always had. But that evening, Brianna told me Lily had asked whether she could bring the library book to the new house, and whether there would be a shelf for it. She was already deciding to stay. They moved in on a Saturday morning in September. No truck. 2 small backpacks, 1 garbage bag of clothes that hit me somewhere. I did not have a name for a library book in a clear plastic sleeve, and 2 children standing in my driveway looking up at the house like they were not yet sure they were allowed to want it. Lily held Owen's hand. "Is this it?" she asked. "This is it," I said. I opened the door. Owen walked in first and stopped in the middle of the living room and turned in a slow circle, looking at everything, the ceiling, the floors, the morning light coming through the kitchen window. Then he looked down the hallway at the 2 open doors. He let go of Lily's hand and walked toward them by himself, and I watched him do it, and I felt something loosen in my chest that had been tight for so long. I had stopped noticing it. That first night, Owen stood in the doorway of his room, looking at the star lamp and the small bed and the crayon drawing taped back in its place on the door, and he looked at the windowsill where the wooden boat sat with the carved initials facing the water. Then he looked out the window, and he went very still. "There's a real one," he whispered. His finger went up to the glass, pointing at the lighthouse out on the point, blinking its patient rhythm against the darkening sky. "A real lighthouse. You can see it from your bed," I told him. He pressed his forehead against the glass and looked at it for a long time. Then he turned around, and with those serious dark eyes and a smile that was small and private and entirely his own, and he said, "Okay, Grandpa," in the tone of voice a child uses when they have decided something important. The weeks that followed were not a fairy tale, and I would not want to tell you they were. Lily tested every boundary the way you test a bridge before trusting it with your weight. She asked for things in small voices and then flinched, waiting for the catch. She watched every exit for 3 weeks. But one evening, she stood in the kitchen doorway and asked in barely more than a whisper if she could have the blue cup with the boat on it. I gave her the cup. She used it every day after that. Owen stopped waking at 3 in the morning to check that the house was still there. In October, I was standing at the kitchen window watching the tide when I saw Emma and Caleb at the back fence, Daniel's children, 7 and 9 years old, standing on the outside looking in. No one had brought them. They had walked from their grandmother's house 2 streets over. Lily was in the yard. She saw them before I did. She stood looking at them for a long moment. I held my breath. Then she walked across the yard and opened the gate. "You want to see the beach?" she said. Emma nodded. Caleb looked at the sand and said nothing, but his feet were already moving toward the opening. Lily turned back toward the house and called up to me through the window. "Grandpa, can Emma and Caleb come down to the water with us?" I looked at my granddaughter standing at the open gate with the Atlantic behind her and the morning light on her face, and one hand still on the latch, not forcing anyone in, just holding the door open for whoever was ready to walk through it. "Of course," I said. They called me childless. For years that word followed me like a judgment, like evidence that my life was diminished, that a house with 4 bedrooms and no one in them was something to be corrected, redistributed, handed to someone whose life counted more. They were so certain it meant empty. They were wrong. They were just early. I never needed to close those doors. I just needed to wait for the right people to walk through them. People ask me sometimes what I learned from all of it. From the box in the garage, from the 48 letters from the morning, the moving truck came and left without moving a single thing. Here is what I learned. Silence is not the same as peace. For 15 years, I accepted a quiet that had been manufactured for me, and I called it my life. I stopped asking questions because the answers I was given were comfortable enough to live inside. And while I was comfortable, 2 children were growing up without a grandfather who would have given anything to know their names. I believe God put that box in my path on a Tuesday in March. A cardboard box behind a toolbox in my son's garage, sealed with tape that had gone yellow at the edges, 3 letters written in blue marker on the side panel, in a handwriting I would know anywhere. That was not coincidence. That was God holding a door open that had been shut for 9 years, and I had enough sense left to walk through it. If I could tell you one thing from this grandpa story, it would be this: do not wait for proof before you go looking for the people who love you. Do not let someone else's comfort become the reason you stay quiet. And if you are the one keeping the letters stop, the cost is always higher than you think. This family story does not end with courtrooms or headlines. It ends with a little girl opening a gate and asking 2 children if they want to see the beach. That is what grandpa stories are actually for. That is what every family story is actually for, not the fighting over what people leave behind, but the choosing of who you go back for. If this family story reached something in you today, leave a comment below and tell me, what would you go back for? Share this with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe so you never miss what comes next on this channel. Thank you for staying until the end. It means more than you know. The stories ahead contain some fictional elements crafted with the purpose of exploring real human values. If that is not the kind of content you are looking for, we completely understand. Feel free to find something that speaks to you better. But if you are still here, we are glad you are.